as my buddy would say, there's a face made for radio, huh? What am I going to talk about this morning? I had a lot of ideas going on in my head this morning. I guess I'll start with Einstein. One of the greatest minds in the scientific community, next to Sir Isaac Newton and Maxwell and a few others. Funny enough, Einstein's theory of general relativity and special relativity, these are two different theories, they do coincide. Wasn't entirely his own invention. There were actually several people he corresponded with throughout the development of this theory. For those who are unfamiliar, Einstein's theory of general relativity is essentially, in a nutshell, it describes mathematically how mass will warp or distort space-time, which then produces the effect of gravity. There's a new theory of gravity going around, or not new, but a more evolved theory of gravity. I can't remember the lady's name. Brilliant mind, beautiful. About how gravity is actually a force, and we just haven't discovered the force carrier yet, and a few other things. Which, if proven correct, it would make it a lot easier to quantize or to rectify the problem in our standard model of cosmology. You have the theories of the large, everything on a cosmic scale, and then of course the theories on the small, the very small, the atomic and subatomic, quantum physics and mechanics. The one thing they've never been able to get to congeal is gravity, our current theories of gravity, with the quantum. Partly because current theories of gravity describe gravity as the effect of the warpage of, or distortion of space-time, as opposed to a force with a force carrier, which would be a boson. We'll get into that later. One of the great things that Einstein did was he combined space-time. He made it a single entity. One of the easy or more common descriptors you'll see in science classes and everything is they'll demonstrate space-time as a rubber sheet. And when you put a massive object in the middle of it, obviously it warps and distorts the rubber sheet, so that smaller or less massive objects around it will follow the curve of space-time. I personally find it a little easier to think of it as more like fluid displacement. The rubber sheet example is a very crude and rudimentary example of what's really going on, but it's also a way to convey a very complex idea in a very simple visual manner in order to at least grasp the basic concept of it. The reason he combined space-time is because they are intrinsically linked. Some of the effects of this theory of relativity are if you are traveling very fast, or if you're around a very large massive object or something that produces a large gravitational field, your time slows down. Time dilation, essentially. Make note of that, because that's how I'm going to tie it back into addiction and sobriety. So, I personally find it better to think of space-time as a fluid and think of mass as displacing that fluid. Not too dissimilar from water displacement, which, if you're familiar with the story of Archimedes, in his eureka moment when he got in the bathtub and saw the water flow out of the tub, which was how he figured out a way to discern real gold from fake gold for the king. Because real gold has a set density, it has a set weight, it will always displace a certain amount of water. Da-da-da-da. Similar. Mass will displace space-time. My personal theories, which I don't have the maths to prove, is that is a better way to look at it. Probably, in some ways, it probably makes the mass a little more complex, and in other ways, it's a little more elegant. Is that time is a function of density in the space-time continuum. So what that means is, just like you have water in different states, from a natural on Earth due to atmospheric pressure and a few other things, water is water. And when its temperature drops too low, it becomes a solid, it becomes ice. Well, the reason that happens is because your heat is a form of electromagnetic energy. You're pulling energy at an atomic level out of the substance. Okay, the atoms are no longer vibrating at the same frequency, and therefore they slow down, and the material becomes what we would perceive as a solid. Think of time in the same way. So, when you get near a large gravitational well or gravity well, black hole, the reason time slows down, in my mind, in my theory, is because it's not just matter that is falling into, and that's exactly it, it's falling into, it's not that a black hole is a giant vacuum. No, it's that it's distorted and displaced space-time around it, so much so that it's more like a waterfall, a funnel. And the curve and gradient of that funnel is so steep that not even the speed of light at 186,000 miles per second is fast enough to escape it. Well, it's not just matter that gets pulled into to this particular gravity well. It's space and time itself. Okay? So if you think of time as a function of density, what happens if you quantize, whatever, take space-time and break it up into the smallest possible components, which would essentially be Planck time. I'm not going to get into what Planck time is. It's just a very, 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 very small amount of time. Really, it's you can't comprehend it with the human brain. It's beyond fast. It's like a billionth of a billionth of a billionth of a second or something like that. It's like 10 to the minus 38. I don't remember now. Anyway, if you break space-time into these chunks, okay, and we'll make it easier. You take 1 cubic meter of space. Think of it as a cubic meter of water. The denser that fluid, not even water, called fluid, the denser that fluid, the slower time passes in that particular given space. So as you come up to, say, the event horizon of a black hole, the point of no return, because space and time is falling into this black hole at such a rate, what is happening is essentially all of space and time is getting crunched up. It's becoming denser and denser and denser, which is why, from an outside perspective, time moves slower and slower and slower for the object that is approaching the event horizon of the black hole. Because from an outside perspective, the space-time is so distorted around the edge of the black hole that time has literally become, it's just like you're traveling through molasses now instead of air. Okay? So for the same amount of energy, you're moving slowly, perceived slowly. only from an outside observer. The participant who's in the molasses, time would probably, according to Einstein's theories, would still be normal. And that's relativity. It's all about your frame of reference. It's all about your perception. Okay, and this is true with life and a lot of things in life. It's also very true with recovery. But that's my theory, is that time is actually a function of density when it comes to the space-time continuum. And if I could ever get the maths to prove this, it would change a whole lot of things. It would help to prove certain aspects of inflation theory, as well as disprove certain other aspects of it. It would help to alleviate some of the problems we have with the uniformity of the universe, as well as its current accelerated expansion rate. It could possibly even solve the issue of dark matter and dark energy, whereas both of those are observable effects of something entirely different. They would be the observable effects of essentially space-time becoming less and less dense due to entropy. It would also mean that the speed of light was variable in the beginning of the universe. It would change a lot of things someday. So, how all of this can tie into sobriety. I try to keep it on that topic because it can really tie into a lot of different things. When getting sober, there is a particular effect that most people that I've spoken to myself have experienced, and that is a form of time dilation. Okay? When you're in active addiction and when you're going through withdrawal, for example, time passes differently, at least to your perception it does. 5 minutes can feel and seem like a lifetime. Excuse me. And there's a particular reason for that, and it's got to do with certain brain chemistry and other things that are going on in the mind. It also has to do with your attention and your focus. In my experience, when trying to quit a particular substance, mine was a very powerful opioid. Because there's a very strong physical component to that addiction. The body and the brain go into a survival mode. Pretty much it's a type of shock, just like as if you were starving to death or dying of thirst. And your brain focuses on obtaining that one thing. So why time dilation occurs? Well, in my experience, it occurs for one of two reasons. One, because you're hyper-focused on a particular aspect or object or activity or whatever. And it's because your brain knows that if you were to do said substance and activity, its brain chemistry would kind of even out. And that's part of the problem, is that because you've been substituting you've been taking an external chemical into the body has gotten used to that source and has no longer created its own version of it. That's the funny thing about drugs and alcohol and all that stuff. The only reason they have an effect on you is because your body produces something very similar, if not the same. You already have to have the receptors for that chemical in order for that chemical to work. Otherwise, it wouldn't do anything. The body would pass it through as waste. So, you've been taking on an external source. The brain and the body no longer produce that thing. You quit that, the body goes into shock. Because it's like, hey, we need this chemical, blah, 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 blah. how that ties into time dilation. So the body goes into a form of shock, the brain goes into a form of shock, which changes the way the brain thinks. It changes the way the neurons think. It changes the way they fire. It changes what you put your attention and your focus on. Okay? Pretty quickly through the withdrawal process, your time dilation starts to change. This is how I always knew I was getting better and I was getting through the withdrawal, was because time would start passing or being perceived to pass in a more average sense. Now, I've thought a lot about this. Why this difference in time? And it's not just because of the hyperfixation of the substance or anything. There's actually, if you go really deep, there are things that are happening on the quantum level. Okay, one of the things that's very mysterious, or as Einstein put it, spooky action at a distance, is quantum entanglement. But there's also another interesting little fact, and that is, hold on, and that's sorry about that. That's the infamous double slit experiment. Okay, what the double slit experiment essentially proved was that on the subatomic level, particles, fundamental particles, behave both like a wave and a particle. But that is dependent on the observer. And that sounds really weird. And it is very weird, actually. What it basically, in a nutshell, one of the things it proves is that your consciousness affects things on a quantum level. Okay. The double slit experiment is, you have a barricade with two slits in it, and a target on the backside, and you fire single electrons or photons at said target with the two slits in it. And if you just observe the background target, you will get what's called an interference pattern. Okay, an interference pattern happens when you have two waves that literally interfere with each other. Okay, so you get a stripe effect. But at any point along that path, from the source of the electrons to the target, if you go to take a direct measurement or observation to try to determine where said particle is or isn't, or how fast it's moving, or anything like this, even just trying to observe it before it hits the target, it changes the pattern on the target. Instead of an interference pattern, you now get what you would intuitively expect, which is a bunch of dots from the individual particles sitting in. The simple fact of trying to measure or observing this particle in flight has changed it from a wave to a particle. Okay. Well, in my experience, this is part of what causes time dilation in addicts. I don't know the exact mechanism of it, but I do know the experience of it. When you start to hyperfixate and, in a sense, go microscopic in your perception, your experience of time changes. Okay? But when you back out and you try to take a higher picture, same thing, your experience of time changes. Why exactly this happens? There's probably a whole series of books on the psychological reasons why. My personal experiences, all of those are true, yes. There's a lot of psychology behind it, but it's also on a much deeper level. There are quantum reasons for it. point to all of that is, if time truly is a function of density in the space-time that we live in, you can control that density based on where you focus your attention and how much energy you put into it. Or specifically the emotional context, which is just energy and motion. This is a key to manifestation. Now, having all of that theory doesn't do you much good on a conscious level. Other than trying to be aware of it and to observe the effects of it. Because by doing so, you will reprogram the subconscious mind. And once that happens, the subconscious mind does what it automatically does, what it does best. It seeks validation. Because subconscious thoughts and programming are essentially beliefs. Not entirely, but they're pretty close. They're part of your belief system. So if you reprogram your mind to autopilot, being able to alter your perception of time and awareness in the world of relative that we live in, you are literally altering your reality. And when you get really good at it, you start to co-create with the universe. In my experience, a lot of the manifestations that happen in my life are just fleeting thoughts. They're more subconscious or unconscious thoughts than anything. But I spent a lot of time and a lot of years reprogramming my subconscious with some of these theories and some of these thoughts. And it ties into all kinds of other things that are popular to believe in now, like timeline jumping, multiverse theory. And yes, I do believe in those. You know, it's not just a matter of reprogramming the subconscious also. It's also a matter of removing the ego enough so that you can listen to what your higher self or your soul, your divine part wants. I don't know if I'm going to post this one. It's kind of all over the place. There's actually so much information packed into this particular message that it would probably take me about a dozen videos to really unpack it all. That's how my brain works. You know, even making this video, there's 3 or 4 other layers of thought that are going on right now simultaneously in my head. I used to think I was insane. That's an interesting thought. The word sanity is inside the word insane. Insanity. So, yeah. I don't know if it's a blessing or a curse, but I don't know. My most recent sponsor says I have the most beautiful mind he's ever experienced. I like to believe that, but I also don't want to get another ego. It took me too long to beat this one down. I guess the whole point to all of that is you are a lot more in control of your reality than what you realize. A lot more. It's just a matter of the right perspective. So if you find yourself feeling like you're walking through molasses, and your days are dragging, try raising your frequency so it might make the space around you a little less dense so you can rise above it. There's all kinds of ways to raise your frequency. I personally find one of the most effective is music. But be very consciously aware of the type of music you're listening to. Music is an extremely powerful programmer. Be mindful of the lyrics, as well as the emotions they bring up. Which is why a lot of the music I listen to now, I listen to a lot of electronic music, EDM, and stuff like that, as well as classical, a whole bunch of shit really. But I'm very weary and leery of the particular lyrics in any song. Which is why I try to listen to more music without lyrics. Yeah, I guess this is just a kind of a rambling stream of consciousness, as somebody once told me years ago. Beautiful person in Missouri.